After I quit my job, I bought my dream beach house to heal. On the first night, my stepmother called. "We're moving in tomorrow. Your dad said it's fine." I just froze. She even added, "If you don't like it, you can find somewhere else." My hands shook, but I smiled. I prepared a surprise for their arrival. Before I tell you about the absolute disaster that awaited her, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. I was standing on the back deck of my newly purchased $4.8 million beach house on Sullivan's Island, South Carolina. The salty ocean breeze was hitting my face, the sound of the Atlantic crashing against the shoreline filling the humid night air. For the first time in a decade, my chest didn't feel like it was wrapped in tight iron bands. I poured myself a glass of expensive red wine, leaned against the cedar railing, and took a deep breath. I had finally done it. I had escaped the brutal, soul-crushing corporate machine, and I had a sanctuary that belonged entirely to me. Then, my phone buzzed on the patio table. The screen lit up in the darkness. Victoria. I stared at the name. I hadn't spoken to my stepmother in 4 months. We didn't do casual check-ins. We didn't do warm family banter. Every interaction with Victoria was a calculated transaction, usually ending with me feeling like a stain on her expensive rug. My thumb hovered over the decline button. I should have pressed it, but a nagging worry crept into my mind. My dad, Robert, was 60 years old and had a history of mild heart issues. What if something was wrong with him? What if he was in the hospital? Against my better judgment, I picked up. "Hello?" I said, keeping my voice neutral. Julian, Victoria's voice came through the speaker, brisk, sharp, and entirely devoid of warmth. There was no hello. No, how are you doing? Listen, your father and I need a change of scenery. The city has been absolutely exhausting lately, and the contractors are making a mess of our kitchen remodel. We're moving in tomorrow. I froze. The wine glass in my hand stopped halfway to my mouth. I blinked, trying to process the sheer absurdity of what she had just said. "Excuse me? Moving in where?" "Into the beach house, obviously," she sighed, the kind of exaggerated sigh you give a slow child. "Dylan told me you bought that massive property on Sullivan's Island. It's perfect timing, really. Your dad said it's fine." My jaw tightened. My dad said it's fine? It's not his house, Victoria. It's mine. "Oh, don't be dramatic, Julian. Family shares," she said, her tone dripping with that fake, organizing authority she used when ordering around waitstaff or rearranging other people's lives. "We'll arrive around 10 in the morning. Carter is coming too. He's taking a break from his startup. Now, the master bedroom obviously goes to your father and me. It has the best ocean view. Carter will take the guest suite on the 2nd floor. You can move your things down to that little storage room off the laundry area. You're used to small spaces anyway." The sheer audacity of her demands hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't asking. She was directing. She was completely taking over the 4,000 square foot home I had just paid for with 12 years of my own blood, sweat, and panic attacks. "Victoria," I said, my voice dropping an octave, a dangerous calm settling over me. "Did Dad actually tell you he wanted to take my master bedroom?" "He's asleep," she snapped, annoyed that I was pushing back. "Don't bother him. You know his heart can't handle stress. We need a place to relax. And this is what we are doing." I gripped the wooden railing so hard I felt a splinter dig into my palm. I could hear the television blaring in the background on her end. I could hear Carter laughing about something. They were already packing. They were already invading. "And honestly, Julian," she added, her voice turning ice cold, "if you don't like it, you can find somewhere else to stay. It's not like you can't afford a cheap motel for a few weeks." She didn't wait for my response. The line went dead. I stood there in the dark for a long time. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so pure and concentrated it felt like electricity humming under my skin. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my phone into the ocean. Instead, I slowly set my wine glass down. A slow, dark smile crept across my face. She thought I was still that helpless 17-year-old kid she could walk all over. She thought I was the financial failure of the family who would just bow his head and retreat to the closet. She had absolutely no idea who I was anymore. And as I stood on the deck of my multi-million-dollar fortress, looking out at the black water, I realized something. This phone call wasn't just an annoyance. It was an opportunity. Victoria had just handed me the rope, and I was going to let her tie her own noose. I walked back inside, locked the doors, and opened my laptop. It was time to pull out the files. It was time to go to war. To fully grasp the magnitude of what Victoria was trying to do, and why I was ready to burn her entire world to the ground, you have to understand the history. You have to understand how we got to this point. It started 17 years ago on a Tuesday in October. I remember the sky that day. It was aggressively, beautifully blue, a completely inappropriate backdrop for the day my entire world collapsed. We were burying my mother. She had died of ovarian cancer just 5 months after her initial diagnosis. 5 months. That was all the warning I got before the person who loved me most in this world was lowered into the ground. I was 17 years old, a senior in high school, completely lost. My father, Robert, was a highly respected real estate attorney in Charleston. He was a good man, but the grief broke him. He didn't know how to handle the silence in our house, so he avoided it. He buried himself in contracts and court filings, working until midnight every single night just to avoid feeling anything. And then, a little over a year after the funeral, Victoria appeared. She was a client of a colleague at his firm. At first, she played the role of the caring, sympathetic savior flawlessly. She brought homemade casseroles to the house. She helped organize my dad's messy office. She smiled warmly at me and called me sweetheart. My dad, desperate for a lifeline, grabbed onto her. They were married in a quiet ceremony just 6 months after they started dating. But the ink on the marriage certificate was barely dry when the mask slipped. Victoria came as a package deal. She had a son from a previous marriage named Carter. Carter was exactly my age, but that was where the similarities ended. Carter was Victoria's golden child. He was loud, demanding, and believed the world owed him a favor just for waking up. Within a few months of them moving into our home, Victoria began the systematic erasure of my existence. Started small. One afternoon, I came home from track practice to find my bedroom door open and Victoria standing inside with an armful of cardboard boxes. "What are you doing?" I asked, dropping my gym bag. "Oh, Julian," she said, not even looking at me as she pulled my books off the shelf. "Carter really needs a larger space to study. He's taking AP classes, and his room is just too cramped. I'm moving your things up to the attic room. You don't mind, do you? You're so adaptable." The room she was packing up was the room my mother had designed for me. It had a window seat my mom had built with her own 2 hands. I stood there, stunned. I looked at my dad, who was standing in the hallway, holding a newspaper. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight. "Dad?" I said, my voice cracking. He refused to meet my eyes. He just patted my shoulder awkwardly as he walked past. "It's just a room, kiddo. Be the bigger person. Let's keep the peace." I packed my own boxes. I moved into the cramped, drafty attic room. That was the beginning. By the following Christmas, I wasn't even in the family holiday photo. Victoria had hired a professional photographer to take pictures by the fireplace. When I came downstairs wearing a nice shirt, she stopped me at the bottom of the stairs, adjusting Carter's expensive wool sweater. "Oh, Julian," she said, feigning surprise. "I thought you said you didn't want to be in the photos this year? The photographer has already packed up his main lights. We'll just do the 3 of us this time." "I'm not being mean. I'm just being practical." "I'm not being mean. I'm just being practical." That became her favorite phrase. She used it every time she cut me out of my own life. The real breaking point, the one that cemented our dynamic forever, happened when it was time to discuss college. My dad had promised me for years that my tuition would be covered. He had a dedicated college fund set up. But one evening at the dinner table, Victoria cleared her throat and tapped her water glass. "Robert and I have been looking at the finances," she announced. Carter has been accepted into that prestigious private university in Savannah. The tuition is quite steep, but it's an investment in his future. We're going to use the primary education accounts to cover it. I dropped my fork. It clattered loudly against the porcelain plate. Wait, what about my college fund? Victoria sighed, offering me a tight, condescending smile. Julian, you're so smart. You don't need a fancy private school. There's a wonderful community college right down the highway. Plus, it will build character if you take out a few loans and work your way through. Carter needs the head start. You're already so independent. I looked at my father. He stared at his mashed potatoes, completely silent. He had handed my entire future to his new wife's son without a fight. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood up from the table, walked to the sink, washed my plate, and went up to the attic. That night, a wall went up inside me. A massive, impenetrable wall of steel. I realized that if I was ever going to survive in this world, I could never rely on anyone but myself. So I built character. I took out crushing student loans. I worked 2 jobs, one at a hardware store and one tutoring statistics late into the night. I paid my own way through the College of Charleston, graduating summa cum laude in finance. Carter, meanwhile, spent 4 years partying in Savannah on my father's dime, crashing 2 expensive cars, and barely scraping by with a business degree. Over the years, the family dynamic set into stone. Victoria's brother, Uncle Charles, became a regular fixture at our house. Charles was a loud, obnoxious man who loved drinking my dad's expensive scotch and praising Victoria for keeping the family together. Whenever I visited for the obligatory Thanksgiving dinner, Charles would look at my cheap shoes and faded jacket. So, Julian, Charles would boom from the leather recliner, swirling his drink. Still working those entry-level spreadsheet jobs? When are you going to get a real career like Carter? He's launching an app, you know. Victoria would sigh dramatically, placing a hand on Charles's arm. Leave him be, Charles. Julian is still finding his way. We can't all be ambitious. I would just nod, eat my turkey, and leave early. What none of them knew, what I kept locked away in absolute secrecy, was that I had found my way perfectly fine. After graduation, I landed a junior analyst role at a massive, cutthroat strategy consulting firm in downtown Charleston. I threw myself into the work with a relentless, almost terrifying focus. I worked 90-hour weeks. I took on the projects no one else wanted. Within 3 years, I was leading client engagements. Within 7 years, I was a senior strategy consultant managing restructuring projects for corporations with revenues north of $200 million. I secured promotion after promotion. By the time I was 32, my base salary alone was $340,000 a year, and my performance bonuses often doubled that. But I lived like a ghost. I drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper. I bought my clothes off the clearance rack at discount stores. I lived in a modest, 1-bedroom apartment. I funneled every single dollar I earned into aggressive index funds and cash-generating rental properties. I wanted to build an absolute financial fortress around myself. I let Victoria, Carter, and Charles laugh at my beat-up car. I let them think I was a struggling clerk barely making rent. It gave me the ultimate luxury, complete privacy. They never asked me for money because they thought I didn't have any. But hiding that kind of success while grinding 90 hours a week takes a physical toll. 5 months ago, my body finally forced the issue. I started having severe heart palpitations at my desk. I couldn't sleep for days at a time. My mind raced endlessly through risk models and client deliverables. I went to see my physician, Dr. Adrian. Dr. Adrian ran a full panel of tests. When the results came back, he sat me down in his office, his expression dead serious. Julian, Dr. Adrian said, tapping his pen against his clipboard, your cortisol levels are catastrophic. Your blood pressure is in the danger zone. You are 34 years old, but your heart is working like it belongs to a 70-year-old man. If you do not walk away from the stress immediately, your body is going to completely shut down. I mean it. You need a 6-month sabbatical starting yesterday. I listened to him. The next morning, I walked into my managing partner's office. Christopher, my boss, was stunned when I handed him my resignation. He tried to offer me more money, more stock options, a prolonged vacation. I refused. The door is always open when you're ready to come back, Julian, Christopher said, shaking my hand firmly. I packed my office into a single cardboard box. I was a multimillionaire and I was unemployed. I needed the ocean. I needed quiet. I found the listing for the massive, 6-bedroom cedar-sided beach house on Sullivan's Island. It was listed at $4.8 million. I called my broker, transferred the cash, and closed in 2 weeks. Around that same time, I was working with my lawyer, Nathan, on some basic estate planning and setting up LLCs for my rental properties. Nathan is a bulldog of a lawyer. He's sharp, incredibly cold when it comes to the law, and misses absolutely nothing. While we were reviewing some county property records to cross-reference a minor zoning issue for one of my rentals, Nathan pulled up the public records for my father's primary residence in Mount Pleasant. He stopped scrolling. He leaned closer to his computer monitor. He printed a document, walked over to the conference table, pushed the piece of paper across the mahogany wood, and tapped it with his pen. Julian, Nathan said, his voice completely flat. Look at your father's signature on this transfer deed. It was filed 2 months ago. I looked closely at the document. It was a deed transferring ownership of my dad's $1.2 million house to a corporate entity. I stared at the signature at the bottom. The R in Robert lacked its usual heavy, sweeping slant. The ink pressure was entirely uniform, heavy at the start and heavy at the finish, like someone slowly drawing a picture of a signature rather than writing it fluidly. It looked wrong. I'm keeping a notarized copy of this, Nathan told me, sliding it into a thick folder. Just in case. I didn't know what to do with that information at the time. I was too burned out, too exhausted from work to start a family war over a piece of paper. I filed it away in the back of my mind. But then came Victoria's phone call. The demand for my beach house. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement. The very next morning after that phone call, I found out just how bold she had gotten. I was standing in the kitchen, brewing coffee, when 2 black luxury SUVs crunched onto the pristine gravel driveway of my beach house. I watched through the window as the doors opened. Victoria stepped out first. She was wearing oversized designer sunglasses, a crisp white linen outfit, and carrying a leather tote bag that cost more than my first car. She stood in the driveway, hands on her hips, scanning my property the way a developer looks at a tear-down. It's a bit rustic, she announced loudly, her voice carrying over the sound of the ocean. But it has potential. We'll need to tear out those hydrangeas immediately. They block the view. Carter climbed out of the second SUV. He was wearing a tailored linen suit for a Tuesday morning, completely impractical for the beach. He didn't bother carrying a single bag, leaving the heavy lifting to the driver. And then my dad stepped out. Robert looked exhausted. His skin was pale, his shoulders slumped. He wouldn't meet my eyes as he walked up the stairs. He carried a small, battered duffel bag, looking less like a man arriving for a vacation and more like a hostage being moved to a new secure location. Before I could even open the front door to confront them, a loud, obnoxious sports car pulled up to the curb. It was a bright red Porsche. The driver stepped out. It was Dylan, one of Victoria's wealthy country club friends, the kind of guy who wore his sweaters tied around his shoulders. Victoria waved him over enthusiastically. Dylan, look at this place Robert bought for us, Victoria beamed, gesturing widely at the massive house I had paid for with my own money. It's a little retirement project. Julian is staying here in the back to help with the upkeep and maintenance. Dylan smirked at me as he walked up the steps. Good to see you're keeping busy, Julian. Nice of your folks to give you a roof over your head. Finding work tough out there. I felt my jaw clench so tight my teeth ached. I looked at my dad. He stood there, staring at his expensive loafers. He didn't correct her. He didn't defend me. He just let her spin this ridiculous lie. Victoria marched inside the house like a conquering general. She didn't take off her shoes. She walked straight past me and immediately claimed the master suite with the wraparound balcony. She directed Carter to the massive guest suite on the second floor. Then, she walked down the hallway, opened the door to a cramped, windowless linen storage room near the laundry area, and pointed. "Julian, get your things out of the big rooms." "You're in there," she ordered, already pulling out her phone to call a local interior decorator. I stood in the hallway. I looked at the storage room. I looked at Victoria's smug, demanding face. I looked at my father, who quickly looked away. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply nodded, picked up my duffel bag, and quietly moved my things into the dark closet. I shut the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the tiny cot, pulled out my phone, and called my lawyer. "Nathan," I said, keeping my voice a low, hard whisper inside the cramped storage room. "That deed you found in the county records, the one with the weird signature, we need to rip it wide open. Today. Hire whoever you need to hire. I don't care what it costs." Nathan didn't ask questions. He recognized the tone in my voice. He works fast. Within 48 hours, he had brought in a man named Luke. Luke was a highly certified forensic document examiner accredited by the American Board of Forensic Document Examiners. He usually worked federal fraud cases and had testified in dozens of high-profile trials. He was not cheap and he did not make mistakes. I drove into downtown Charleston to meet them. We sat in Nathan's glass-walled conference room. Luke slid a thick, bound folder across the mahogany table toward me. "It's a simulated forgery," Luke stated with absolute, chilling certainty. "And honestly, Julian, it's a sloppy one. The person who signed this transfer deed did not possess Robert's muscle memory. The pen pressure is entirely wrong, the microscopic stops and starts indicate someone tracing a shape, not writing a name fluently. If you put me on a stand, I will testify to a 99.9% certainty that Robert did not sign this." I stared at the blown-up images of the signatures. "Where did the house go?" I asked. Nathan opened another file. "This deed transfers the entire Mount Pleasant property, assessed at $1.2 million, to a limited liability company called Hale Premier Properties, LLC. Hale, Victoria's maiden name. She had stolen a massive house right out from under my father's nose, transferring the title to a shell company she controlled completely. But it didn't stop there. When you find one rat in the walls, you never just find one. I used the forensic report to establish probable cause," Nathan explained, his voice tight. "I went to a judge we trust and secured emergency subpoenas for your father's entire financial portfolio. Julian, you need to brace yourself." Nathan pulled out a stack of bank statements, thick with red highlighter marks. "The house is just the tip of the iceberg," Nathan said, tracing a line on the top page. "I pulled the records on your dad's retirement accounts. His IRA has been methodically drained for massive withdrawals over the past 14 months, totaling $380,000. The money was routed directly to a private savings account at Coastal Heritage Bank. The account is registered under the name V. Hale." I gripped the edge of the conference table. My knuckles turned white. "She took his retirement fund?" "And there's a credit card," Nathan continued relentlessly, pulling out another statement. "Opened 18 months ago under Robert's social security number. He is listed as the primary account holder, but Victoria is the sole authorized user. The current revolving balance is $47,000. I pulled the itemized charges. It's all luxury spa retreats in Hilton Head, designer boutiques on King Street, and first-class flights to New York. Robert's email isn't even attached to the account. The paperless billing goes to a hidden email address she controls." I felt physically sick. My father, who had worked his entire life, was being bled dry. "There's one more," Nathan said softly. "The joint checking account. The one Robert uses to pay the mortgage, utilities, groceries. Over the last 2 years, she has been siphoning cash out in increments of $5,000 to $10,000. She labels the transfers in the memo line as household expenses or contractor fees, but the routing numbers trace back to a secret trust account. Another $215,000. I sat back in my chair and did the math in my head. The house, the IRA, the credit card. The trust. $1.842 million. My father was essentially bankrupt. He was living on credit he didn't know he had, facing a massive tax penalty for early IRA withdrawals he didn't make, while his wife paraded around Charleston playing the wealthy, generous philanthropist. If this ever went to a divorce court, it would be a bloodbath. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. The anger was gone, replaced by a terrifying, icy resolve. I wasn't just going to kick Victoria out of my beach house. I was going to obliterate her entire social existence. I was going to strip away every ounce of fake prestige she had stolen. I knew exactly where and how to do it. The Low Country Bar Association's annual charity gala was exactly 3 weeks away. It was the social event of the season for Charleston's elite. Judges, politicians, wealthy developers, and society columnists would all be there. And Victoria was scheduled to be honored with the association's most prestigious award, Philanthropist of the Year. It was her crowning achievement. It was the event she had been talking about non-stop since she moved her designer luggage into my house. She had spent over $8,000 on a custom gown just to walk across that stage. I needed maximum exposure. I needed a platform that she couldn't silence. I picked up my phone and called David. David was a senior editor at the city's most widely read and feared society magazine. More importantly, he was one of my mother's oldest college friends. He was one of the very few people in Charleston who actually saw through Victoria's polished act from day one. But his publisher was strict. They never let him write anything negative about the local elite without irrefutable, hard proof, out of fear of losing advertising dollars. I met David at a quiet, run-down diner on the edge of town, far away from the country clubs Victoria frequented. The place smelled like old coffee and grease. I slid the thick manila envelope across the sticky table. David adjusted his glasses, pulling out the documents. He read through the forensic report. He traced the highlighted numbers on the bank statements. When he finally looked up, his eyes were blazing behind his lenses. I knew she was a vulture, David whispered, tapping the forged deed. I've waited 15 years to take a swing at this woman, Julian. She plays the generous saint, but she never lets anyone audit her charity foundation. You give me the green light, and I will write an investigative expose that will salt the earth she walks on. Do it, I told him, my voice completely steady. I want the article fully written, fact-checked, and locked in the system. Have it ready to publish the exact minute she steps onto that stage to accept her little award. David nodded slowly, a predatory smile on his face. Consider it done. The pieces were coming together perfectly, but the universe wasn't finished. It decided to hand me the ultimate weapon just a few days later. I received an anonymous text message on a burner number. It read, I know what Victoria is doing. I know who she really is. Meet me at the Botanical Gardens tomorrow at noon. Come alone. I can help. I showed up at the sprawling gardens the next day, half expecting an ambush, maybe a private investigator Victoria had hired. Instead, sitting on a wooden bench near the duck pond, I found a man in his early 60s. He was wearing a faded polo shirt and khaki pants, feeding breadcrumbs to the mallards. He looked up as I approached. You're Robert's son, Julian, the man said, his voice gravelly but kind. He extended a hand. My name is Aaron. I was married to Victoria a long time ago, before she met your dad. I stared at him, taking his hand hesitantly. Victoria rarely talked about her first marriage. When she did, she always claimed that Aaron was a deadbeat, financially abusive, and that she had fled the marriage with nothing but the clothes on her back to protect Carter. Aaron reached into a worn leather briefcase resting on the bench. He pulled out a thick, yellowed legal document sealed with a court stamp. I saw your name on a guest list for the upcoming Bar Association gala, Aaron said quietly. I still keep tabs on the Charleston legal scene. I read the glowing puff pieces the local papers are writing about Victoria's charity work. I couldn't stomach it anymore. Couldn't let her do it again. Your dad is not her first victim, Julian. He handed me the document. I opened it. It was their official divorce decree from 2009, filed in Savannah. I scanned the dense legal text until a specific highlighted section caught my eye. Judgment of dissipation of marital assets. She bled me dry, Erin said, looking out at the water. She set up secret bank accounts in her maiden name. She forged my signature on business loans. She intercepted the mail so I wouldn't see the statements. She walked away with $190,000 before I even realized the money was gone. I was too ashamed, too broken to press criminal charges back then. I just wanted her out of my life. But she's running the exact same playbook on your father, just on a much larger scale. I held the divorce decree, the weight of the paper heavy in my hands. This wasn't just a sudden burst of greed. This was a pathological pattern. Victoria wasn't a wife making bad financial decisions. She was a highly calculated, serial financial predator. I thanked Erin, took the decree, and drove back to Sullivan's Island. I walked through the front door of my beach house just as Victoria was sitting at the massive kitchen island. She was drinking a mimosa, wearing a silk robe, and aggressively swiping on her iPad. She didn't even look up at me as I entered my own home. Julian, the Wi-Fi in this house is absolutely terrible, she complained, waving a manicured hand in the air. Fix the router immediately, and pick up my dry cleaning on your way to wherever it is you go to pretend to work all day. I need that dress pristine for the gala. I walked past her into the kitchen to grab a glass of water. I didn't say a word. Suddenly, her phone rang from the living room. It was the interior decorator calling about the living room furniture. Victoria sighed in annoyance, left the iPad glowing on the marble counter, and walked away to take the call. I glanced down at the screen. My blood turned to absolute ice in my veins. Her search browser was open. The query typed into the search bar was crystal clear. How to add spouse name to property deed South Carolina without presence. She wasn't just stealing my dad's retirement. She had realized the beach house was legally in my name. She was actively researching how to forge my dad's name to claim partial ownership as my parent, and then manipulate the deed to get her name on it. She wanted my house, the house I bought to escape her. I stepped back from the counter. The rage inside me was so intense, so pure, it felt like complete clarity. She wasn't going to get a single grain of sand from my property. The countdown to the gala had begun. 13 days before the gala. The sun was just barely cresting over the ocean horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. The beach house was dead quiet. Victoria never woke up before 9 in the morning, and Carter usually slept until noon, recovering from whatever expensive bars he had haunted the night before. I found my dad sitting on the back deck. He was staring blankly at the crashing waves, holding a mug of black coffee that had clearly gone cold. In the pale morning light, he looked incredibly frail. He looked much older than his 60 years. He looked like a man who knew he was drowning but couldn't find the energy to swim. "Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the sound of the surf. I pulled up a wooden chair next to him. "We need to talk." He sighed deeply, rubbing a hand over his face. He didn't look at me. "Julian, please, don't start a fight today. Victoria is very stressed about the gala preparations. Just stay in your room. Let's just keep the peace. I can't handle the yelling." "There is no peace, Dad," I said firmly. I placed the thick, heavy manila folder on the wooden table between us. It landed with a solid thud. "Open it." He looked at the folder, then finally at me. He saw something in my eyes that made him hesitate. His hands were shaking slightly as he reached out and flipped the cover open. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't try to soften the blow. I walked him through every single document like a prosecutor laying out a murder case. I pulled out the forensic report from Luke, showing the side-by-side comparison of the forged signature. I showed him the deed to the Mount Pleasant house, now owned by Hale Premier Properties. I watched his eyes widen in horror as I pulled out the bank statements. I showed him the drained IRA. I showed him the maxed-out credit card with the spa charges. I showed him the secret trust account filled with his hard-earned salary. $1.8 million, Dad, I said quietly, the number hanging in the salty air between us. She took everything. The house you built, the retirement you saved for, the credit score you maintained. It's all gone. She stole it. My father didn't speak. He couldn't. He just kept tracing his trembling finger over the forged signature on the deed. His chest hitched. His breath caught in his throat, and a single heavy tear tracked down his weathered cheek, splashing onto the financial ruin laid out before him. I didn't sign this, he choked out, his voice cracking, sounding like a terrified child. Julian, I swear to God, I never signed this document. I know you didn't, Dad, I said, placing a hand over his trembling one. And we are going to fix it. We are going to get it back. But I need you to be strong. I need you to sign a sworn legal affidavit right now, confirming you did not authorize any of these transfers. And then, the hardest part. I need you to look her in the eye every single day for the next 2 weeks and pretend nothing is wrong. Robert looked up at me. The broken, passive ghost of my father vanished. In its place, I saw a deep, hardened sorrow, mixed with a profound sense of shame. He realized he had traded his own flesh and blood for a woman who was actively destroying him. He nodded slowly, his jaw setting with a newfound resolve. Tell me what to do, he whispered. We spent the next hour reviewing the exact plan. Nathan had already prepared the affidavit. Robert signed it right there on the hood of my car in the driveway, with the early morning joggers passing by as witnesses, before Victoria even stirred from her expensive sheets. The tension in the house over the next 2 weeks was absolutely unbearable. Every time Victoria barked an order at my dad, every time she complained about the cost of the caterers while secretly funneling his money, I saw his jaw clench. But he played his part perfectly. He smiled. He agreed. He fetched her sparkling water. He watched the woman who robbed him blind complain that her $8,000 dress wasn't tailored fast enough. But the night before the gala, the storm brewing over our heads finally broke. I was sitting in my cramped, windowless closet room, reviewing my notes and timeline for the next evening. The door creaked open slightly. My dad slipped inside and closed the door softly behind him. He looked pale, almost sickly. He held out his hands. In them, he carried a small, tarnished walnut box. It was locked with a tiny brass clasp. She went out to get her nails done, he whispered, his voice shaking. I was looking for my heart medication in her nightstand. I couldn't find the bottle, but I found a false bottom in the drawer. This box was hidden under it. He used a small flathead screwdriver he had brought from the garage to pry open the brass clasp. It snapped with a sharp click. He opened the lid and handed it to me. Inside the velvet-lined box was a single, folded piece of paper. It looked old. The edges were yellowed and slightly frayed. I took it out carefully, feeling the heavy parchment. I unfolded it. I recognized the handwriting instantly. The looping Y, the sharp crossing of the T. It was my mother's handwriting. My breath caught violently in my throat. I looked at the date at the top right corner. It was dated 3 days before she died in the hospice ward. My dearest Julian, the letter read, the ink slightly faded but still clear. If you are reading this, I am already gone. I am so sorry I couldn't stay to watch you grow up. But I want you to know how immensely proud I am of the man you are becoming. Never let anyone make you feel small. Never let anyone tell you your worth is tied to what you provide for them. You have a brilliant mind and a kind heart. You are enough, Julian. You have always been enough. I love you, forever. I read the words again, and again. My vision blurred. My mother had written me a final goodbye letter, a true inheritance of love and worth. And Victoria had found it when she moved in. She had stolen the very last piece of my mother's soul, the final words she meant to give me, and locked it in a box in the dark for 17 years. She hid it just to ensure I grew up feeling unloved, abandoned, and easily manipulated. The stolen money was bad. Forging the deed to the house was a felony. But this was pure, unadulterated evil. It was the murder of a child's spirit. I looked at my dad. He was sitting on the edge of the tiny cot, weeping silently into his hands. I didn't know, he sobbed, his shoulders shaking. Julian, I am so sorry. I let that monster into our home. I let her do this to you. I folded the letter carefully, my hands completely steady now. I placed it in my shirt pocket, right over my heart. I didn't cry. I felt a terrifying, absolute calm wash over every nerve in my body. The last ounce of hesitation evaporated. Don't apologize, Dad, I said, my voice cold as ice. Just be ready for tomorrow night. While we sat in the dark closet, my lawyer Nathan was making his final move. He had requested an emergency, highly confidential meeting with Judge Thomas. Judge Thomas was the highly respected president of the Low Country Bar Association. He was the man personally overseeing the gala and the man scheduled to hand Victoria her award on stage. Nathan walked into the judge's chambers and handed him the entire master file. The forensic analysis of the forged deed. The bank statements showing the stolen IRA funds and the fraudulent credit card. Aaron's 2009 divorce decree showing the exact same pattern of asset dissipation. And finally, Robert's sworn, notarized affidavit confirming he was a victim of massive financial fraud. Judge Thomas reviewed the documents in absolute silence. The only sound in the room was the ticking of his grandfather clock. When he finished reading the last page, he took off his reading glasses and rubbed his temples. This is a profound disgrace to this institution, Judge Thomas said grimly, looking at Nathan. And a felony. Consider it handled. The schedule for tomorrow evening will be adjusted. The trap was fully, inescapably set. Back at the beach house, Victoria was sleeping soundly down the hall in her stolen master bedroom, dreaming of her moment in the spotlight, dreaming of the applause. She had absolutely no idea that the glittering stage she had built for herself was about to become the site of her brutal public execution. The grand ballroom of the Belmont Charleston Place Hotel was the kind of room designed to make ordinary people feel insignificant and wealthy people feel immortal. Massive crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm, golden light over the 220 guests. These were the power players of the Low Country. Circuit court judges, state legislators, real estate tycoons, and the society columnists who documented their every handshake. The tables were covered in heavy ivory silk, set with sterling silver flatware and bone china. Victoria moved through the crowd as though the entire evening had been explicitly choreographed around her. She wore a custom champagne-colored gown that she loudly bragged cost $8,200. Her hair was swept up into a flawless chignon, and a diamond pendant caught the chandelier light every time she turned her head. She kissed cheeks, clasped hands, and leaned in close to whisper practiced flatteries into the ears of powerful men. She looked radiant. She looked untouchable. She had assigned me to table 18. It was located in the absolute back corner of the ballroom, directly next to the swinging doors of the service kitchen. Every time a waiter pushed through with a tray of roasted tenderloin, the door bumped against the back of my chair. It was a calculated insult. She wanted me in the room just to fill out the family portrait, but she wanted me hidden away like a dirty secret. I didn't care. The view from table 18 was perfect. My lawyer, Nathan, sat calmly to my left. He was sipping a glass of sparkling water, his sleek leather briefcase resting casually against his polished dress shoes under the table. I looked across the room to table 1, the VIP table directly in front of the main stage. My father, Robert, sat there, his posture rigidly straight. He hadn't touched his water. He hadn't spoken to Victoria since they stepped out of the luxury town car. Victoria was too busy soaking in the adoration of her peers to notice that her husband looked like he was marching to the gallows. Uncle Charles sat next to them, laughing loudly and drinking premium scotch, completely oblivious to the hurricane about to make landfall. At table 12, sitting with quiet, terrifying patience, was Aaron. Victoria's ex-husband wore a sharp navy suit. He watched her work the room with the expression of a man who had waited 16 years for a ghost to finally become solid so he could strike it down. And up in the press balcony, David, my mother's old friend and the senior editor of the city's top society magazine, had his digital recorder resting on the ledge. He caught my eye across the massive room and gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod. At 8:30 in the evening, the master of ceremonies tapped the microphone. A soft ringing echoed through the ballroom, and the low hum of wealthy chatter slowly died down. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC announced, his voice smooth and practiced. "Before we move to the evening's main awards presentation, the Low Country Bar Association has a brief, unscheduled announcement." Victoria straightened in her chair at table 1. She smoothed the silk of her gown over her lap. She pasted on her generous, camera-ready smile, the exact smile she had been rehearsing in my mirrors for weeks. She thought they were going to announce a surprise donation in her honor. Then, Judge Thomas rose from his seat near the front. He adjusted his suit jacket, walked up the brief flight of stairs to the stage, and took the podium. He did not smile. He gripped the edges of the wooden lectern, looking out over the crowd with the measured gravity of a man who had spent 30 years handing down severe sentences. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Thomas's voice boomed through the speakers, devoid of any celebratory warmth. "I regret to inform you that we have received deeply concerning information that requires our immediate attention before we proceed any further this evening." 220 pairs of eyes snapped to the stage. The silence in the room suddenly felt heavy, thick. Victoria's perfect smile didn't falter, but from where I sat, I saw her fingers dig into the pristine white tablecloth. Under Section 7.3 of the Low Country Bar Association's bylaws, Judge Thomas continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "Any substantiated allegation of financial misconduct involving an award nominee must be addressed immediately, before an honorific is conferred. We cannot, and will not, celebrate a legacy built on a foundation of fraud." A low murmur rippled through the tables. It was the sound of 200 people recalibrating their expectations at the exact same second. "This evening," Judge Thomas said, his voice slicing through the whispers, "we have received a formally documented complaint supported by forensic evidence, sworn testimony, and independently verified financial records. The complaint details massive financial exploitation, and it was filed by a member of the nominee's own family." Victoria was on her feet before Judge Thomas even finished his sentence. "This is absurd," she cried out. Her voice was pitched perfectly between outrage and bewilderment. It was the voice of a woman who had spent decades controlling narratives. She looked up at the stage, pressing a hand to her chest. "Thomas, what on earth is going on? Who filed this? This is a charity event, not a courtroom. You are ruining a beautiful evening." Judge Thomas did not flinch. He looked directly over the crowd, past the crystal centerpieces, past the wealthy donors, straight to the back corner of the room. "Julian," Judge Thomas said clearly, "you have been invited to present your evidence to the association." The murmur became a shockwave. 220 heads turned in unison, scanning the room until they found me sitting at table 18. Victoria whipped her head around. Her eyes locked onto mine across the massive ballroom. For one long, suspended second, we stared at each other. 15 years of silence, 15 years of her pushing me into attics and closets, 15 years of her telling me I was nothing, all of it hung in the air between us. I stood up. I picked up the thick manila envelope resting on the table. Nathan gave me a brief, approving nod. I stepped away from the table and began to walk. 17 tables. I walked past all of them. Each step I took was deliberate, my dress shoes echoing audibly against the polished hardwood floor. I could feel the weight of every single gaze in the room burning into my skin. I heard the rustle of expensive evening gowns as women turned entirely around in their chairs to watch me. Someone at table 5 set their glass down too hard, the sharp clink ringing out like a judge's gavel. "Robert," Victoria hissed loudly, her voice cracking like a struck match. "Do something. Your son has lost his mind. He's trying to ruin me because he's jealous. Stop him." My father sat perfectly still. He kept his hands folded neatly on the table in front of him. He did not look at his wife. He stared straight ahead at the stage. I climbed the steps. I stood at the podium next to Judge Thomas. I looked down at the crowd. The chandelier light was intensely hot and completely merciless. I looked at Victoria, who was still standing, her face flushed with a mixture of fury and rising panic. I set the envelope on the podium. I leaned into the microphone. I didn't come here tonight to destroy anyone, I said. My voice was steady, echoing clearly through the massive room. I came here because the truth simply could not wait one more day. I opened the envelope. I pulled out the first document and signaled the audiovisual technician at the back of the room. The massive projector screen behind me illuminated. A high-resolution scan of a legal document appeared for everyone to see. On April 12th of last year, a transfer deed was filed in Charleston County. I said, reading the facts as coldly as I would in a corporate boardroom. It conveyed total ownership of my father's family home in Mount Pleasant, a property with an assessed value of $1.2 million, to a limited liability company called Hale Premier Properties. The sole registered member of that LLC is Victoria Hale. I pointed to the screen. At the bottom is my father's signature. Or, rather, what was supposed to be his signature. I clicked the remote. The next slide appeared. It was a side-by-side forensic comparison. On the left, the signature from the deed. On the right, my father's authentic signature from his medical power of attorney. This analysis was conducted by Luke, a federally accredited forensic document examiner. I stated, letting the credentials wash over the room of legal professionals. His official conclusion, documented in report number 2050, states that the signature on the deed transferring the property to Victoria is a simulated forgery at the absolute highest probability level recognized in the field. The ballroom went completely, horrifyingly silent. It wasn't the polite silence of people listening to a speech. It was the airless, suffocating silence of a room that had collectively stopped breathing. Victoria gripped the edge of table 1. Her knuckles were bone white. "He's lying!" she shrieked, the polished facade finally cracking. "Robert gave me that house. He signed it in front of me." Suddenly, the screech of a wooden chair pushing back against the floor echoed through the room. My father stood up. Robert buttoned his suit jacket. He turned to face the entire ballroom, turning his back completely on Victoria. His voice was low, trembling slightly, but carrying a devastating clarity. "I did not sign that document," my father said. "I did not know that shell company existed, and I absolutely did not authorize the transfer of my home." Victoria recoiled as if he had physically struck her. "Robert," she whispered, genuine fear finally entering her eyes. Uncle Charles, sitting next to them, suddenly looked very pale. He pushed his scotch glass away and stared at his lap. I wasn't finished. I pulled the second set of documents from the envelope. Between January and October of last year, I continued, projecting the redacted bank statements onto the screen, for separate withdrawals were made from my father's individual retirement account. These withdrawals totaled $380,000. The funds were deposited into a private savings account at Coastal Heritage Bank registered solely under the name V. Hale. I heard a sharp gasp from a woman sitting at table 7. Two attorneys at table 3 leaned toward each other, their faces grim, recognizing the exact legal statutes being broken in real time. "Furthermore," I said, my voice rising slightly to cut over the growing whispers, "a supplementary credit card was opened using my father's social security number without his knowledge or consent. The current balance is $47,000. The itemized charges consist entirely of luxury travel, designer purchases, and personal spa treatments. And finally, a separate trust account holds $215,000, siphoned directly from their joint checking account under the guise of routine household expenses." I set the papers down flat on the podium. I looked directly at Victoria. The total amount of assets diverted from my father without his knowledge or authorization is approximately $1.842 million. Under South Carolina law, the financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult with a documented cardiac history is a felony. Victoria turned to the room. The tears came immediately. They were glistening, perfectly timed, rolling down cheeks that hadn't creased with genuine empathy in a decade. "This is a family misunderstanding," she cried out, her voice breaking with practiced fragility. "Robert gave me access to everything to manage the household because of his health. I was protecting his assets. How dare you turn a charity dinner into a public trial, Julian? You have always been jealous of me. You have always hated me. Judge Thomas stepped forward, leaning into the microphone. Mrs. Hale, the evidence presented tonight has been independently verified. Consequently, the Low Country Bar Association is permanently revoking the Philanthropist of the Year award, effective immediately. Victoria's mouth fell open. No sound came out. She looked around the room, desperately searching for a friendly face, someone to defend her. She looked at Dylan, who had mocked me on the porch. Dylan was staring intently at his water glass, completely ignoring her. Then, from table 12, a man stood up. Aaron rose with the quiet, devastating composure of a man who held the final nail for the coffin. He buttoned his navy jacket and stepped into the aisle. "My name is Aaron," he said, his voice cutting through the thick tension. "Victoria was my wife before she moved to Charleston." Victoria froze. Her eyes went wide, absolute terror replacing the fake tears. She took a step back, bumping into her chair. "No," she whispered. "We married in 2005, Aaron continued, looking straight at her. "The marriage ended in 2009. It ended after I discovered that Victoria had quietly transferred $190,000 from our joint marital accounts into a personal savings account hidden under her maiden name." He held up the thick, yellowed legal document for the room to see. "This is a certified copy of our divorce decree," Aaron announced. "The ruling specifically cites the severe dissipation of marital assets. She forged my signature on business loans. She isolated me from my finances. I was too ashamed to stop her then. But I will not stand by and let her destroy another good man while you all applaud her." He walked to the front and handed the divorce decree up to Judge Thomas, who accepted it with a solemn nod. The dam broke. The ballroom exploded into sound. 220 people began talking at once. It was a cacophony of shock, disgust, and scandal. Women were covering their mouths. Men were shaking their heads. The elite society of Charleston, the people whose approval Victoria craved like oxygen, were looking at her as if she were a rabid dog that had somehow wandered into a black tie event. Victoria stood frozen in the aisle. Her champagne gown caught the chandelier light, but she no longer looked radiant. She looked hollowed out. Carter sat beside her empty chair. The golden child, the boy who had everything handed to him, was crying. Real, ugly tears streamed down his face. He didn't look at his mother. He stared at the pristine white tablecloth, realizing his entire life was funded by stolen money. My father walked away from table 1. He climbed the 2 short stairs to the stage and stood right beside me at the podium. He didn't take the microphone. He didn't need to say a single word. Robert, standing shoulder to shoulder with his son, facing the room, facing the truth, said absolutely everything. Victoria looked at us on the stage. Then she looked at the sea of faces that had, just 10 minutes ago, admired her. Not a single person met her gaze. Even Uncle Charles had turned his chair slightly away from her. She picked up her $8,000 designer clutch from the table. She turned her back on the stage. She walked toward the grand exit doors. The sound of her champagne heels striking the marble floor echoed sharply through the ballroom. A solitary, rhythmic clicking that faded into the lobby. No one stopped her. No one followed her. This is the moment that changes everything. The moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment 1 below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. For a few long seconds after the heavy mahogany doors closed behind Victoria, the ballroom simply held its collective breath. The sheer shock of the public execution was still settling over the crowd. Judge Thomas stepped back up to the microphone. "The Philanthropist of the Year award will not be conferred this evening," Judge Thomas stated, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "Furthermore, the The Low Country Bar Association will immediately initiate a full, forensic audit of all charitable donations received through the Hale Foundation. We ask for your patience as this matter proceeds through the appropriate legal and criminal channels." He stepped back. The room exhaled. As my dad and I descended the short stairs from the stage, the crowd parted for us. It wasn't the awkward avoidance you give to someone who just caused a scene. It was a profound, almost uncomfortable respect. A man stepped out from table 3. He was tall, with silver temples, wearing a bespoke tuxedo. It was Douglas, the founding partner of one of the most ruthless and respected litigation firms in the Carolinas. Douglas extended his hand to me. I shook it. His grip was like a vice. "Julian," Douglas said, his voice low but carrying immense weight. "You presented that evidence more clearly and effectively than half the senior litigators I have on my payroll. If your father needs representation for the divorce proceedings, or to push the criminal referral, here is my personal card." He pressed a thick, embossed business card into my palm. "Pro bono. We don't tolerate vultures in this city." I thanked him. I looked up to the press balcony. David was already packing up his recorder. He caught my eye, tapped his watch, and gave me a thumbs up. The article was already launching. My father and I walked out of the Belmont Charleston Place Hotel into the humid, sticky night air. The valet brought my beat-up Honda Civic around. My dad didn't hesitate. He opened the passenger door and slid into the worn fabric seat, a stark contrast to the luxury SUVs he had arrived in. The drive back to Sullivan's Island took about 25 minutes. We drove over the massive Arthur Ravenel Jr. Bridge, the steel cables glowing against the dark sky. My father didn't speak for the first 20 minutes. The silence in the car wasn't heavy or oppressive. It was the exhausted, hollow silence of surviving a massive wreck. Somewhere over the Intracoastal Waterway, with the marsh grass stretching out black and endless on either side of the highway, my dad finally broke the silence. "I'm filing for divorce first thing Monday morning," he said. His voice wasn't shaking anymore. It was resolute. I didn't argue. I didn't offer empty comforts. I just reached across the center console and squeezed his shoulder. "I've got your back, Dad. We'll handle it together." When we pulled into the gravel driveway of my beach house, the property was completely dark. Victoria's massive luxury SUV was gone. She had apparently ordered a driver to take her away from the hotel, but she didn't come back to my house. Where she went, I didn't know, and frankly, I didn't care. Her expensive garment bags, her monogram towels, and her ridiculous decorative pillows were still inside, but her poisonous presence was gone. As we walked into the kitchen, my dad's phone started buzzing on the marble counter. It buzzed and buzzed and buzzed. 14 text messages came through between 11 at night and 2 in the morning. I could hear the phone vibrating through the drywall as I lay in my bed. The next morning, my dad handed me his phone while I was making coffee. I read the messages in chronological order. At first, she tried to play the victim. "Robert, please, you have to let me explain. I was trying to protect our assets from taxes. Don't do this to our family. Carter is devastated." When he didn't reply, the tone shifted entirely. The real Victoria came out. "You are making a massive mistake. You are nothing without me. This is all Julian's fault. He manipulated you because he's a pathetic loser. You ruined me. You humiliated me in front of the whole city. You'll regret this." I handed the phone back to him. "Block the number, Dad. Only let her speak to your lawyer." He nodded, pressing the block button without a second thought. While Victoria was desperately firing off text messages in the dark, David's article went live on the magazine's digital platform. By 9 in the morning on Sunday, the story had exploded. The headline read, "The Philanthropist Who Stole. Inside Victoria Hale's Double Life." David had kept his word. It was a masterpiece of surgical, undeniable journalism. He didn't use sensational adjectives. He just stacked the evidence like bricks. He published the high-resolution scan of the forged deed alongside Luke's expert forensic analysis. He printed the bank statements, redacting the account numbers but leaving the staggering dollar amounts fully visible. He quoted Judge Thomas on the record. and he laid Aaron's 2009 divorce decree right beside the current allegations, painting a crystal-clear picture of a serial predator. Within 12 hours, the article had over 130,000 views. It was shared thousands of times across local community boards and social media. A local tabloid site, the Low Country Daily, had actually tried to run a piece early that morning based on an interview Victoria gave them in tears, claiming I was a troubled, jealous stepson who ambushed her. But the moment David's piece dropped with the hard, forensic evidence, the tabloid deleted her interview and issued a humiliating public retraction, apologizing for their one-sided reporting. The tide hadn't just turned against Victoria. It had become a tsunami that wiped her off the map. The fallout from the gala wasn't just social. It was catastrophic on a legal and financial level. First thing Monday morning, my dad walked into the Charleston County Family Court wearing his sharpest navy suit. He looked like a man who had woken up from a 15-year coma. He filed the petition for divorce. The grounds were brutal: fraud upon the marriage and severe dissipation of marital assets. The petition, prepared over the weekend by Douglas's elite litigation team, cited every single stolen dollar, every forged signature, and demanded a complete freeze on all of Victoria's personal accounts. That same afternoon, Nathan drove down to the Charleston County Sheriff's Office. He bypassed the patrol desk and walked straight into the Financial Crimes Division. He filed the formal criminal complaint. The charges recommended by the detectives were precise and devastating: forgery in the first degree, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, identity fraud for the unauthorized credit card. Each one was a felony under state law. Each one carried potential prison time measured in years, not months. The sheriff's office didn't waste time. They opened an official investigation immediately and issued a warrant instructing Victoria to surrender herself within 72 hours. The social dominoes continued to fall rapidly. The Low Country Bar Association released a formal press statement confirming the permanent revocation of her award. But worse for Victoria, the emergency audit into her charity foundation uncovered an absolute nightmare. The rot went much deeper than just my father's bank accounts. The audit revealed that over $85,000 in charitable donations meant for local shelters had been quietly reclassified through internal accounting tricks. The money was redirected to pay for Victoria's personal catering invoices, her country club dues, and a massive consulting fee paid out to Hale Premier Properties LLC, the exact same shell company she used to steal my dad's house. When that news hit the local papers, the corporate sponsors fled like rats from a burning ship. A major regional bank, a luxury hospitality group, and an elite Porsche dealership publicly withdrew their pledges and scrubbed Victoria's name from their websites in a matter of hours. Over $400,000 in foundation funding vanished into thin air. By Wednesday, Victoria had hired a sleazy, high-priced criminal defense attorney. His very first move was to call Nathan and propose a quiet settlement. She returns the money, closes the accounts, signs over the house, and Robert drops the criminal charges, the attorney offered over speakerphone. Everyone walks away quietly without a messy trial. I was sitting in Nathan's office when the call came in. I leaned toward the microphone. Absolutely no settlement, I said, my voice cold. My father is entitled to the full protection of the law, not a backroom handshake. We will see her in criminal court. By the end of that week, Coastal Heritage Bank froze both her private savings account and the secret trust account. Nearly $600,000 of stolen cash was locked down tight, completely inaccessible to her. On Thursday evening, while I was sitting on my deck watching the tide roll in, my phone rang. It was Carter. It was the first time my stepbrother had called me directly in over 8 years. I almost didn't answer, but I pressed accept and put the phone to my ear. Julian, Carter said. His voice was quiet. The arrogant, entitled sneer he usually wore like a badge of honor was completely gone. He sounded incredibly small. Can we talk? I'm listening, I said. I'm moving out of the city, Carter told me. I can't show my face here anymore. My investors pulled out of my startup after the article dropped. They didn't want the association. He took a shaky breath. I'm calling because I need to apologize. I didn't say anything. I let the silence stretch out, forcing him to fill it. I've been crying for 3 days, Carter admitted, his voice cracking. Not because my mother is facing prison, but because I finally realized what I was a part of. I watched her treat you like garbage for 15 years. I took your bedroom. I spent your college fund. I laughed when Uncle Charles insulted you. I did it because it was easy, and because I liked being the favorite. Why did you hate me so much, Carter? I asked. It was a question that had bothered me since we were teenagers. Because she lied to me, Carter confessed, a bitter edge to his voice. When we moved in, my mom told me that you had received a massive secret inheritance from your mother's life insurance. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. She told me you hoarded it, that you refused to share a single dime with the family to help pay the mortgage, and that you thought you were better than us. She used that lie to justify everything. Why you had to live in the attic. Why I got the college money. She brainwashed me into thinking you were the villain. I closed my eyes. The sheer depth of Victoria's manipulation was staggering. My mother left no money. She left a single, beautiful letter of encouragement, and Victoria had stolen even that. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Julian, Carter said softly. I haven't earned it. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what she is. And I am so sorry. Start telling the truth, Carter, I replied. That's how you fix yourself. I hung up the phone. 6 months later, the heavy, humid air of a Charleston summer has settled over Sullivan's Island. I am sitting on the back porch of my beach house, holding a glass of iced tea, listening to the waves crash against the shore. The property looks incredible. The hydrangeas Victoria wanted to tear out are in full, vibrant bloom. My father lives in the small, renovated guest cottage 50 steps from the main house. He finalized his divorce from Victoria in late October. The brutal settlement, enforced by Douglas's elite legal team, restored every single stolen dollar to his accounts, forced the sale of the shell company to return his house, and left Victoria with absolutely nothing but mounting legal debt. More importantly, my dad is finally healing. He sees a trauma therapist every Thursday afternoon. He is working through the guilt of letting a monster stand between him and his son for 15 years. Last Tuesday, he actually came over to the main house and cooked dinner for the two of us. It was the first time he had cooked a meal since my mom was alive. The chicken was dry, and the potatoes were burnt, but I ate every single bite with a smile on my face. I didn't go back to the corporate grind at the massive strategy firm. I realized I didn't need to kill myself for someone else's profit margin anymore. I founded my own company, Beckett Advisory Group. It's a solo strategic consulting practice based out of a beautiful, sunlit office in downtown Charleston. Because I had proven my analytical skills so publicly at the gala, my first 3 major clients included Douglas's massive litigation firm and 2 real estate developers who were in the audience that night. In my first quarter as my own boss, my revenue exceeded my old salary by 20%. As for Victoria, her criminal trial is scheduled for early next year. She is facing 4 felony counts. She currently wears a GPS ankle monitor and is legally prohibited from coming within 500 feet of my father or me. If convicted, she will spend the next decade in a state penitentiary. I honestly don't think about her much anymore. She is a ghost, banished from the life I built. Every single morning, before I open my laptop to start my workday, I walk out onto the wooden deck of my beach house. I look out at the vast, endless stretch of the Atlantic Ocean meeting the horizon. And every morning, I reach into my shirt pocket. I pull out a piece of paper with yellowed edges. I read the looping handwriting, the sharp crossed T's. You are enough, Julian. You have always been enough. For 15 years, I made myself small. I hid my success. I drove a beat-up car. I lived in the shadows because I thought it was the only way to survive the emotional war zone of my own family. I traded my dignity for the appearance of family harmony. I let a parasite convince me that setting boundaries meant I was being selfish. But sitting here now, listening to the ocean, I know the absolute truth. Taking back your life is not a single, explosive moment on a stage. It is a series of quiet, fiercely difficult decisions you make every single day. It's the decision to stop shrinking so that someone else can feel tall. It is the realization that blood does not entitle anyone to your peace, your sanity, or your bank account. I didn't buy this beach house just to have a nice view. I bought it to heal. And sometimes, healing means burning down the lie you've been living in so you can finally build something real on the ashes. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. It wasn't an easy one to tell, but it's one I know I had to share. I hope this resonated with you in some way, especially if you've ever felt invisible in your own life. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation where you had to finally stand up to someone who thought they owned you? Let me know in the comments. Also, if you are hearing my voice right now, that means you made it to the very end. You belong to a special group of people. I want you to drop a comment below with just the letter W. That stands for winner. It's our secret code, a sign for me to recognize the absolute best of you who stayed with me through this entire journey. If my story meant something to you today, please hit that like button and don't forget to follow the channel. We have a lot more stories to share, and I'd love to have you along for the ride. Stay strong and never let anyone tell you your worth.